You know why you're here, don't you?
I have nothing to say to you.
The silence in an Alliance interrogation room is a weapon. It's not just quiet. It's a heavy, manufactured nothing that presses in on you, designed to make you want to fill it with words. Any words? I focused on the single glass of water on the white table between us. It was the only real thing in the room. I watched a drop of condensation slide down its side, leaving a wet trail like a scar. My hands were flat on the table. The Alliance medics had cleaned them, scrubbed the dirt and blood from under my nails, but I could still feel the phantom weight of the rifle I was never supposed to touch. The being across from me didn't move. Administrator Valerius wasn't big or threatening, but his stillness was unnerving. He hadn't looked at me yet. His eyes were fixed on the glowing data pad in his hands. "Your report is difficult, Specialist Orin," he said finally. His voice was smooth and flat, like a river stone. "It is full of inconsistencies, full of feelings." He said the word feelings like it was a disease. "I need facts." I didn't answer. The facts were just bones. He wouldn't understand the meat on them. He sighed, a tiny impatient puff of air. "Let's start with the most illogical part. Let's talk about the laughter." He looked up from his data pad, and his eyes were cold and dark as the space between galaxies. "You wrote here that the humans of Task Force 87 were laughing during active combat." I could hear it then. A ghost of a sound in the silent room. Jax's deep rumble, Mickey's sharp giggle. "Our analysts have a term for that," Valerius continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "Combat stress psychosis, the mind breaking under pressure." "Is that what you witnessed, Specialist? Did your team go insane?" A memory flashed behind my eyes. Captain Petrova, turning to look at me in the middle of a firefight, a smudge of black grease on her cheek and a fierce, impossible smile on her face. "No," I said. The word felt small but solid. "No?" Valerius tilted his head. "Then what was it? A war cry? A previously undocumented battle tactic?" "It was laughter," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "That is not an answer." I looked him straight in the eye. "It's the only one there is. It doesn't fit in your tidy little boxes, does it, Administrator? There's no column in your report for why they smiled when they were dying." For the first time, a flicker of genuine emotion crossed Valerius's face. Frustration. He had hit a wall his logic couldn't climb. He leaned back, the illusion of calm composure finally breaking. "Start from the beginning, Orin," he commanded, his voice sharp now. "On the dropship. And stick to what happened. I want a sequence of events, not a poem." I reached for the glass and drank. The water was sterile, tasteless. It tasted like the room. I closed my eyes, pushing away the white walls and the cold man sitting across from me. I let the real memory surface, not the sanitized version I had tried to put in the report. I let the noise come back. The story wasn't in the facts. It was in the noise. It was in the laughter. And it started in a metal box falling from the sky. The noise was...
"We're approaching the LZ. Gear up."
Roger that, Captain.
The noise was the first thing that hit you. It wasn't just sound. It was a physical thing, a deep rumble that vibrated up from the floor, through the soles of my boots, and straight into my bones. The whole ship, the Vagrant, felt like a metal beast groaning in its sleep. The air was thick. I could taste oil, sweat, and the burnt smell of human coffee. It made my throat scratchy. My people built cities of light and glass. This felt like being inside a dying engine. My job was to watch them. The humans. Task Force 87. They called themselves the Stray Dogs, and I was starting to see why. In the corner sat the big one, Sergeant Gideon. They called him Rhino, and it fit. He was huge. He had these old, beat-up headphones on, but I could still hear the noise leaking out. I wouldn't call it music. It was just anger, a storm of screaming and brutal, chaotic noise. My sensors tried to find a pattern in it and failed. It was just a wall of sound. But he sat there, head nodding slowly, completely calm. Across from him was the tech, Corporal Sato. Glitch. Her hands moved like spiders, twisting thin red wires around an old bullet casing. I leaned a bit to see what she was doing. My stomach churned. She was making a little monster. A tiny, perfect copy of the things waiting for us down on the planet. She finished, held it up between two fingers, and caught me staring. A sharp grin cut across her face. "Cute, right?" she asked. I didn't know what to say. I just stared at the little metal demon in her hand. Next to her was the kid, Private Gallo. Patch, He was probably praying in his own way. His prayer was the soft, obsessive click-clack of him opening and closing his medical kit. Over and over, he wasn't checking anything anymore. He was just doing it to keep his hands from shaking. His eyes were wide. He was the only one whose fear was on the surface. He was the only one who felt honest to me. And then there was the captain, Anya Petrova, Mama Bear. She was the quiet at the center of the storm. She just sat there watching her pack of stray dogs, sipping a black sludge from a metal cup that had seen better days. She looked completely, utterly at home in the middle of this flying piece of hell. She knew I was watching her. She met my eyes for a second and just gave a tiny, slow nod. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't unfriendly. It just said, "I see you." I looked away. I had to be there. I had to watch them. My people, the Caelian, were dying. Our light was fading. The only hope was a cure from the Alliance, and the price for that hope was me. I had to sit in this metal box with these loud, crazy, death-seeking apes and figure out why they kept winning fights they were supposed to lose. I had to turn their madness into a formula. The ship suddenly dropped, my stomach lurching into my throat. Red lights flashed. 2 minutes to landing, the pilot's voice crackled. Welcome to Charon, strays. Try not to get bit. Something in the air changed. The noise inside the ship didn't stop, but it focused. Rhino pulled off his headphones. Glitch pocketed her little monster and her fingers flew across a data pad on her wrist. Patch snapped his medkit shut, his eyes now sharp and clear. Anya finished her coffee, clipped the empty cup to her belt, and pulled her helmet on. Her voice came through my own helmet's comm, crisp and calm. Lock and load. We're on the clock. In seconds, they were a different species. They moved together, the sound of weapons locking into place echoing through the hold. They weren't a bunch of individuals anymore. They were one thing, a weapon ready to be fired. I looked at them, these humans. Their fear, their chaos, their madness, it had all burned away, leaving something hard and bright and terrifying in its place. They were ready, and I knew in that moment that I was the most alien thing in the room. The ship was no longer just a...
We make landfall here. This red zone is our primary objective. Expect heavy resistance.
The ship was no longer just a box falling through space. It was a weapon aimed at a planet that had already eaten one team whole. The noise of the engines changed, a deeper groan as the pilots fought against the thick, soupy atmosphere of Charon. Huddle up, dogs, Captain Petrova's voice cut through the comms. We gathered around the flickering holomap in the center of the hold. It showed a twisted, scarred landscape in angry shades of red and gray. It looked like a diseased organ. All right, Anya said, her voice all business. Here's the playground. Her armored finger tapped a spot deep within a network of canyons. The map labeled it the Silence. Command wants a sensor relay planted right here. They say it'll map the Blight's network. And the way she said "they say" made it clear she didn't believe a word of it. Her finger traced the path we were supposed to take. The air out there will try to dissolve your lungs. The ground is corrosive. The local flora will try to inject you with neurotoxins, and the fauna will use your corpse as a nursery. Yes, she made it sound like she was reading a grocery list. She zoomed in on a small, blinking red icon not far from our target. This, she said, tapping the red X, is where the 12th Recon Team went dark 6 months ago. Better gear than us. More support. They just vanished. No SOS. No final words. Just static. Mickey Glitch Sato snorted. Amateurs, she muttered, not looking up from the console on her wrist. Probably tripped over the warranty agreement to Jack's Rhino Gideon just let out a low grunt. It wasn't a sound of fear. It was a sound of anticipation, like a bull pawing the ground before a charge. I watched Leo patch Gallo's hand drift down to touch one of the pouches on his medical rig, a small unconscious gesture for reassurance. My own mind was screaming. All my training, all my Caelian instincts for logic and self-preservation were blaring like alarms. I had to speak. "Captain," I said, my voice coming out tighter than I intended. The humans all turned to look at me. It felt like every spotlight in the universe had just swung in my direction. The data on the 12th Recon is clear. The environmental hazards alone present a catastrophic level of risk. Combined with a hostile, adaptive enemy, my analysis projects a 95.7% probability of total mission failure. The hold went quiet except for the groan of the ship. I felt like I had just announced that the sky was, in fact, falling. Anya turned away from the map to face me fully. Her helmet's dark visor hid her expression, but I could feel the weight of her stare. She took one step closer, her mag boots clanking heavily on the deck. "Orin," she said, and her voice was dangerously quiet, "your analysis is based on data from a team that failed. Logic is what got them killed. They thought the universe played by a set of rules." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You know what day it is?" The question was so out of place, it short-circuited my thoughts. "It is the 23rd cycle of the 9th rotation. It's Wednesday," she said. She reached out and clapped me on the shoulder. The impact was surprisingly solid, a gesture that was both a dismissal and strangely an inclusion. "And on Wednesdays we go to work." She turned back to the map as if the conversation was over. As if the probability of our collective deaths was no more important than the weather. I stood there, stunned into silence. I looked from the blinking red X on the map to the faces of her team. They were looking at me, and in their expressions, I saw a shared, grim understanding that I was not yet a part of. The thought hit me like a physical blow. My own people were dying logically, fading away quietly in sterile, ordered infirmaries. We were analyzing our extinction, charting its progress with flawless data. These humans, they didn't analyze death. They met it head-on with a joke and a shrug on a random Wednesday. The thought was terrifying. And deep down, in a place my logic couldn't reach, a tiny, unfamiliar part of me found it exhilarating. The final klaxon blared, a piercing sound that signaled our arrival. "Touchdown in 30 seconds, the pilot announced. "Good luck, strays." The heavy ramp at the back of the ship began to hiss, a line of light cracking open the darkness. Through it, I saw my first real glimpse of Charon. It wasn't a landscape. It was a thick, swirling wall of yellowish-green fog, a toxic curtain waiting to rise on the first act of our final play. The ramp slammed down with a deafening crash of metal on rock. For a second, nobody moved. We just stared out into the thick, yellow-green fog that clung to the ground like a shroud. The air that rushed in wasn't just air. It was heavy, wet, and smelled of acid, rot, and something else. Something metallic and sweet, like old blood. It was the smell of a world that actively hated life. Anya Petrova didn't hesitate. She was the first one down the ramp, her rifle already up and scanning, its combat light cutting a useless, hazy beam into the fog. She moved with a low predator's grace, planting her feet wide on the black, glassy rock. Jack's Rhino Gideon was right behind her, his heavy cannon looking like a natural extension of his armored arms. He moved to her left, Mickey Glitch Sato to her right. In less than 3 seconds, they had formed a tight, lethal perimeter around the ramp's exit. They were a machine. I stood at the edge, my boots still on the clean metal of the dropship. I looked out and saw nothing that made sense. Twisted spires of black rock jutted out from the ground like broken teeth. The moss that grew on them wasn't green, but a sickly purple that seemed to pulse faintly in the gloom. This wasn't just another world. This was a world that had gone wrong. "You coming, Orin?" Anya's voice crackled in my helmet. "Or are you going to miss the party?" I took a breath of the recycled air in my suit one last time, then stepped down onto the surface of Charon. The rock beneath my boot felt solid, but it was a lie. Nothing here was solid. Nothing was safe. The ramp hissed shut behind me, sealing us in. The roar of the Vagrant's engines faded as it lifted off, and then silence. It was the most unnatural silence I had ever experienced. There was no wind, no rustle of leaves, no distant cry of an animal. It was the deep, profound, waiting silence of a tomb. It was so quiet it felt loud, pressing in on my ears. I suddenly understood why the target zone was called the Silence. This whole planet was holding its breath. "Glitch," Anya ordered, her voice a low whisper in the comms. "Give me a ground rating." Mickey knelt down, her movements economical. "Testing for trace minerals and coyotes," she muttered, more to herself than to us. She pulled a small, polished silver disc from a pouch on her belt. It was a standard geological sensor. Instead of placing it down, she tossed it a few feet away from the rock we stood on, onto a patch of damp, black soil. The hiss was sharp, like water hitting a superheated pan. A puff of greasy, black smoke erupted from the ground. The silver disc glowed red for a split second, bubbled like melting wax, and then dissolved into the soil. It was gone in less time than it takes to blink. Leo Patch let out a long, low whistle. "Okay," he whispered. So the ground is hungry. Anya didn't even seem surprised. Her head was on a constant, slow swivel, scanning the fog. Rhino, you're on point, she commanded. Everyone else, single file. Stick to the rocks. No detours. Let's move. And just like that, they started walking. Rhino moved forward, a walking mountain of armor and firepower, and the fog swallowed him almost immediately. Anya went next, then Mickey, then Leo, each one vanishing into the yellow-green haze until it was just me. I took my place at the back of the line, my hand resting on the grip of the sidearm holstered at my hip. I had only ever fired it in simulations. I didn't know how to properly clean it or what to do if it jammed. But right now, the cold, hard weight of it was the most comforting thing in the entire universe. Then I took a step forward, and the fog took me too. We moved for what felt like an eternity. The only sound was the soft crunch of our boots on the volcanic rock and the sound of my own breathing, loud and ragged in my helmet. The silence pressed in, a physical weight. My Caelian mind, built to find patterns, went into overdrive trying to analyze it. I scanned the fog, traced the twisted shapes of the rock formations, tracked the faint, sickly pulsing of the purple moss. But there was no pattern. It was the architecture of chaos. I felt like a bug trapped in a jar, being watched by something I couldn't see. It happened so fast I almost didn't process it. 1 second, we were moving in a tight, single file. The next, the world dissolved into a blur of motion. Something erupted from the fog to our right. It wasn't an animal running. It was an object being thrown, a streak of black chitin and sharpened bone aimed directly at the back of the line, at Leo Pachgallo. My mind did exactly what it was trained to do. It tried to analyze. Speed, approximately 80 kilometers per hour. Trajectory, linear. Morphology, 6 limbs, 2 of which are bladed forearms, exoskeletal plating. While my brain was busy taking notes, the humans acted. Jack's Rhino Gideon didn't even turn. He moved like an avalanche, slamming his massive frame backward and to the left, putting himself directly in the creature's path. He didn't try to block it, he became the block. The thing hit him with a sickening crack of chitin on armor, the force of it barely making the big man stumble. "Contact!" he roared, and the word was followed by a deafening blast from his cannon that tore a hole in the fog. Before the creature could recover, a blinding white light flashed from Mickey Glitch Sato's position. It wasn't just light, it came with a high-frequency scream that made my helmet audio shriek. A flash bang, the creature recoiled, disoriented. That was all the opening Anya Petrova needed. "Target," was all she said. 2 shots from her rifle, so close together they sounded like one. Thump, thump, they hit the creature in the place where a neck should have been. It convulsed once, then collapsed into a heap of twitching limbs. The entire engagement, from initial attack to kill, had lasted less than 4 seconds. And in that time I had done nothing. I stood frozen, my rifle still pointed at the ground, my finger nowhere near the trigger. My mind, which I had always considered my greatest asset, had utterly betrayed me. It had chosen to analyze instead of act. The team was already moving. Anya was kneeling beside Leo, who was on the ground, more from shock than injury. Jack stood over them, his cannon still smoking, scanning the fog for more threats. "You good, Patch?" Anya asked, her voice impossibly calm. "Yeah, Captain," Leo stammered, getting to his feet. "Thanks, Rhino." The big man just grunted in response. Anya stood up and walked over to me. I couldn't see her face through the dark visor, but I didn't need to. I could feel the cold disappointment radiating off her. "You see that, Orin?" she asked, her voice low and hard. "That's what happens when you think. You calculate, you analyze, you hesitate." She jabbed a finger toward the dead creature. "Out here, you think, you die. You feel and you react." Mickey chimed in over the comms, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Or you shoot. Shooting is also a good option." Just a thought. A wave of shame, cold and heavy, washed over me. They were right. I had been a liability. Useless. My mind replayed my own frozen inaction. The thought screaming in my head, I froze. I was useless. Then something new trickled into my comms. Faint, like a bad connection. A whisper. Frozen. Useless. It was my own thought, played back to me in a distorted, mocking whisper. My blood ran cold. I looked around wildly. It wasn't the comms. It was this place, this planet, the Echo Blight. It wasn't just hunting us. It was listening. I looked down at my rifle. It felt impossibly heavy in my hands. Anya was right. My logic, my analysis, everything that made me Caelian was a death sentence here. These humans weren't crazy for abandoning it. They were adapting. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to my core that if I didn't learn to do the same, I would be the next one to vanish into the static.
They're all gone. It consumed them all.
The thought echo faded, but the chill it left behind stayed with me. It was like having a stranger whisper your own darkest fears into your ear. The rest of the team seemed to shake it off, their discipline a shield against the planet's psychological warfare. But I could see it in the subtle ways they moved. Their scans were a little wider, their formations a little tighter. They had felt it too. We pushed deeper into the canyons. The landscape grew more hostile, the rock formations twisting into shapes that looked like screaming faces and grasping claws. It was a world sculpted by nightmares. "Hold up," Mickey's voice crackled. "Got something." Man-made, we stopped. Up ahead, nestled between two massive blade-like rocks, was the wreckage. It was what was left of an Alliance forward scout post. The metal was buckled and torn, scarred with the same acidic corrosion we'd seen on the sensor disc. But this was different. There were other marks, too long, deep gouges in the reinforced plating, as if a giant had tried to claw its way inside. "The 12th Recon," Anya stated. It wasn't a question. "Looks like they tried to dig in," Jax rumbled, his cannon pointed warily at the wreckage. "Didn't work out so well." "I'm going in," Mickey announced, already moving toward the ruined structure. "Glitch, stay sharp," Anya warned. "Always am, Mama Bear," she shot back. Curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back. "And I am very unsatisfied right now." She slipped through a jagged tear in the hull. The rest of us formed a defensive perimeter outside, our weapons pointed out into the oppressive fog. The silence felt heavier here, thick with the memory of what had happened. A few minutes passed. They felt like hours. Then Mickey's voice came back, strained. "You guys are going to want to see this." We moved in cautiously. The inside of the outpost was a scene of controlled chaos. Gear was scattered, but not randomly. It looked like the soldiers had been in the middle of a desperate, last-ditch effort. There were no bodies, no blood, just emptiness. Mickey was kneeling next to a damaged command console. "Their main power core is fried," she said, her usual sarcasm gone. "But the emergency logs, some of the data crystals are still intact. The last one is corrupted, but what?" Anya pressed. "The file is Caelian," Mickey said, looking directly at me. "Encrypted with a standard Lumen-class cipher. I can't break it." "Can you?" All eyes were on me again. But this time, it wasn't disappointment I felt from them. It was a flicker of hope. This was my world. Logic, data, ciphers. I knelt beside the console. The crystal was cracked, but its internal matrix was still glowing faintly. I placed my fingertips on its surface. The cool, familiar hum of data flowed into me, a welcome relief from the chaotic noise of this planet. I closed my eyes and navigated the broken pathways of the code, piecing together shattered fragments of data like a puzzle. And then I found it. The last log, a voice memo. I routed the audio through my helmet's external speaker for the team to hear. A voice filled the ruined outpost. It was calm, measured, and achingly familiar. It was the voice of a Caelian tactical officer just like me. Log entry 7-4. The hostiles, the Echo Blight, they exhibit non-standard swarm patterns. They learn, they adapt faster than any previously recorded species. Our defensive algorithms are proving insufficient. There was a pause. The sound of frantic typing in the background. Log entry 7-0. They're not just adapting to our tactics. They're adapting to our thoughts. We fire from the left, they anticipate. We plan a retreat. They're already at the extraction point. It's like they know what we're going to do before we do it. The voice was losing its composure now, a tremor of fear creeping in. It's the echo. It's not just repeating our fears. It's reading our intent. It's a weapon, a weaponized telepathy. How do you fight an enemy that knows your next move? How do you outthink something that's already in your head? The final words were a choked sob, cut short by a blood-curdling shriek of terror. Then, a new sound filled the recording. A soft, mocking chorus of whispers. The sound of the echo, blight. The log ended. The silence that followed was absolute. I opened my eyes. The team was staring at the console, their faces grim. The mystery of the 12th recon was solved. They hadn't been outfought. They had been outmaneuvered, outpredicted, and driven mad from the inside out. They had tried to fight a monster with logic, and the monster had eaten their logic for breakfast. I looked at Anya. Her helmet was turned towards me, but I knew she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the path ahead, at our own mission. So, Jax Gideon rumbled, his voice a low growl that seemed to shake the very foundations of the wreckage. That's the game we're playing. Anya nodded slowly. They know how soldiers think, she said. They know how strategists think. She turned her head and I felt her gaze land squarely on me. So we have to stop thinking like soldiers. And in that moment, looking at the grim determination on their faces, I finally understood. Their jokes, their chaos, their laughter, it wasn't insanity. It was a strategy. It was their only defense against an enemy that fed on order and predictability. They were fighting a logical monster with pure, weaponized chaos. And they had just brought me, a being made of pure logic, right into the heart of its hunting ground. We left
This beacon. It will call them. All of them.
You mean to destroy this world?
We left the metal tomb behind us. Nobody said a word. They didn't have to. We had all heard the recording. We all understood. The atmosphere in the squad had shifted. Their practiced chaos was still there, but underneath it, I could feel something new. A cold, diamond-hard focus. They weren't just soldiers on a mission anymore. They were hunters, going after a monster that nobody else could kill. And me, I was the bait. Every logical thought, every tactical analysis I could form was a dinner bell for the enemy. My very presence here was a danger to the team. But they kept me with them. I didn't understand why. We pushed on, and the landscape grew stranger. The black rocks gave way to organic structures, like massive, twisted spines curving up from the ground. We were getting closer, closer to the silence. Finally, we came to the edge of a cliff. Below us lay a vast, silent basin. This was it, the heart of the nightmare. The basin wasn't empty. It was filled with a dense network of milky white, faintly glowing fungal threads, all connected to a colossal structure in the center that looked like a single, rotting, diseased brain. All right, Anya said, her voice low. Glitch, Rhino. Get the present ready. Jax Rhino Gideon set down his cannon and opened the large metal case we'd been carrying. I had assumed it held sensor equipment. It didn't. What they pulled out looked like no device I had ever seen. It was a polished metal sphere, covered in intricate carvings and faintly pulsing blue crystals. It looked more like a piece of art than military hardware. That's not a sensor relay, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mickey Glitch Sato, who was plugging a series of cables into the sphere, glanced at me over her shoulder. Sharp one, aren't you, Starman? She said, but there was no sarcasm in her voice this time. Only weariness. You're catching on. I turned to Anya. What is it? She didn't answer right away. She just stared down into the basin at the glowing brain in the center. This enemy, she said, it eats logic. It eats tactics. It eats order. You send an organized army in here and it will snap them like a dry twig. She turned to me. But there's one thing it doesn't understand. One thing it can't predict. She tapped the side of her helmet. This mess inside our heads. Human emotion, anger, fear, loyalty, stupid, stubborn pride. She pointed to the metal sphere. That's not a relay. It's a bomb, but it doesn't run on explosives. It's a resonance beacon. When it's triggered, it absorbs the strongest emotions of anyone nearby and turns them into a weapon. It'll send out a pure psychic scream, a wave of unfiltered, chaotic emotion right into their network. I stared at the sphere, then back at her, the horrible truth starting to form in my mind. The strongest emotions? Yeah, Orin, Anya said, her voice as soft as ash. The emotions of a soldier who knows they're about to die. And there it was. The final, ugly truth. We weren't sent here to place a device. We were sent here to die. Our sacrifice was the weapon. Alliance Command hadn't sent a squad. They'd sent a biological bomb, a suicide bomb, and these soldiers were its trigger. A wave of nausea washed over me. It wasn't from fear. It was from the betrayal. The Alliance had lied to us. They had lied to me. I looked at the soldiers. Jax was carefully placing the bomb in position. Mickey was setting up the activation sequence. Leo was checking his supply of painkillers, not to save lives, but to keep them fighting just a little bit longer. None of them looked surprised. They had known. They had known all along. And I, the logic specialist, had finally solved the puzzle. Their laughter wasn't a tactic. It wasn't insanity. It was defiance. It was a middle finger to the universe. A declaration that even when faced with certain death, even when betrayed by the very people who sent them, they would still choose to meet their end on their own terms. With a smile on their faces, the truth settled over. The truth settled over me, heavy and cold as a tombstone. I felt a surge of pure, logical rage at Administrator Valerius, at the cold calculus of the Alliance that saw these vibrant, impossible people as nothing more than a variable in an equation. Then I looked at the stray dogs, and the anger dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching sense of awe. They weren't angry. They weren't panicking. They were getting to work. Jack's rhino Gideon was on his knees, not in prayer, but in careful survey of the ground where they would place the bomb. He brushed away loose stones, testing the foundation of the black rock with his armored hands as if ensuring the most stable possible stage for their final performance. It was a gesture of profound, practical care. Mickey Glitch Sato worked on the resonance beacon, her fingers dancing across its surface. Her usual manic energy was gone, replaced by a deep, fluid concentration. She wasn't just connecting wires, she was weaving a net to catch a god. Every connection was checked twice. Their sacrifice would not be wasted on a technicality. I saw Leo patch Gallo a few feet away. He had his medical kit open, but he wasn't checking the inventory anymore. He was laying out injectors of painkillers and stimulants in a neat, perfect row on a flat rock. It was a final, desperate offering to the gods of war, a small act of mercy for the brutal moments to come. And Anya Petrova moved between them all. She was the calm at the center of their quiet storm. A hand on Jax's shoulder. A quiet word with Mickey about the detonator's range. She checked the firing lines, adjusted a power pack on Leo's rig. She wasn't a captain anymore. She was a matriarch, tending to her family, making sure they were ready for the long night ahead. I watched them, and I felt like a ghost. My mission was to observe. Logically, now that I had the full picture, my task was complete. I could find a cave, hide, and wait for pickup. It would be the smart thing to do. The logical thing, I thought of my own people, the Caelian, fading away in their silent, logical cities. I thought of Valerius in his clean, white room. Then I looked at Jax, who had just finished positioning the bomb and was now taking a worn, folded photograph from a compartment inside his helmet, looking at it one last time. I made a decision. My movements felt clumsy, foreign. I walked over to the stack of ammo crates. I picked up a magazine for the pulse rifle that was still slung over my shoulder. My hands fumbled with the energy cells at first. I had never loaded one myself. The action was inefficient, illogical for a being with no combat experience. But I kept at it, pushing the glowing blue cells into the magazine with a series of clicks that sounded deafeningly loud in the silence. Click, I am not an observer. Click, I am not a variable. Click, I am here. I felt a presence beside me and looked up. It was Anya. She stood over me, watching my clumsy hands work. I expected her to tell me to stop wasting ammo, to go and hide. Instead, she just waited until I finished. When the last cell clicked into place, she placed a heavy, gauntleted hand on my shoulder. "Glad you're with us, Orin," she said, her voice quiet in my calm. She gave my shoulder a single firm squeeze, then turned and walked toward her chosen firing position on the edge of the cliff. I finished loading 3 more magazines, my movements becoming smoother, more certain with each one. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a hero. But I would not be a ghost. I would stand with them. I looked out over the vast, silent basin. I was no longer just analyzing the chaos. I was a part of it now. As if in answer to my thought, a low, guttural groan echoed up from the valley floor. It was not a sound made by wind or rock. It was the sound of something vast, ancient, and malevolent waking from its slumber. The brain-like structure at the center of the web began to pulse with a sickly, purple light. It knew we were here. The groan from the bass and deepened into a chorus, a sound of grinding rock and tearing flesh that vibrated up into our boots. The purple light from the central brain pulsed faster, a diseased heartbeat pumping venom into the veins of its network. And then they came. They didn't charge in a mindless wave. They flowed out of this fog and up the canyon walls like a tide of black oil. They were silent, coordinated, and utterly alien. Some scrambled along the ground on all 6 limbs, moving with a horrifying insect-like speed. Others clung to the rock faces, their claws digging into the stone, positioning themselves for an attack from above. The whispers started again in my helmet, no longer faint echoes, but sharp, venomous needles aimed at the cracks in our minds. Scared a little medic? So much blood. The whisper was aimed at Leo. I saw him flinch. Your toys will break, little tinkerer. All your clever wires will snap. That was for Mickey. She just bared her teeth in a silent snarl. Positions! Anya's voice cut through the rising dread like a plasma blade. Light them up! The world exploded in sound and light. Jack's Rhino Gideon's cannon was the first to speak. It didn't fire a bullet. It unleashed a thunderous concussion shell that detonated in the midst of the advancing horde. The blast sent creatures flying, their chitinous bodies cracking like rotten wood. It wasn't just killing them, it was creating a wall of pure force. Mickey tossed out 2 small spider-like drones that immediately began firing suppressive bursts of pulse energy, their shots creating a frantic, deadly rhythm. Go get 'em, my little psychopaths, she yelled into the comms. Anya was methodical, a surgeon of violence. She fired single, precise shots from her rifle, each one finding a weak spot, a joint in the armor, the place where a head should be. Pop, pop, pop. With every shot, a creature fell. I was behind a low wall of black rock, my rifle in my hands. The familiar paralysis tried to creep back in, my mind wanting to analyze the enemy's flanking maneuvers, their terrifying synergy. Observer. The whisper coiled in my ear, using my own self-doubt against me. Useless. No, I whispered back, the word a puff of fog inside my helmet. I forced my arms up, bracing the rifle against the rock. It felt like lifting a fallen pillar. My hands were shaking. I aimed at the swarming mass below, a chaotic sea of black limbs and silent screams. I pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed into my shoulder, brutal and shocking, throwing my aim off completely. My shots went wide, splashing harmlessly against the canyon wall. The weapon felt alien in my hands, a wild thing I couldn't control. Panic began to bubble in my chest. I was wasting ammo. I was a liability. Then I heard Anya's voice in my head, from our earlier lesson. You think you die. You feel and you react. I took a breath. I stopped looking at the whole battle. I focused. I picked one creature, just one. It was scrambling up the rock face directly below me, its bladed forearms digging in for leverage. It was an ugly, terrifying thing, a nightmare given form. I ignored everything else. The noise, the explosions, the whispers. There was only me and that creature. I braced the rifle again, leaning into it, making its weight a part of me. I remembered the single useful thing from my Caelian training simulations. Controlled bursts. I squeezed the trigger. The first 3 shots missed. The 4th hit its leg, making it stumble. I didn't stop. I kept my finger on the trigger, tracking the creature's fall, painting it with a stream of blue energy bolts. It tumbled from the rock face, hitting the ground in a crumpled heap, and didn't get back up. I stared at the spot where it had fallen, my heart's hammering. A strange metallic taste filled my mouth. There was no triumph, no satisfaction, just the cold, stark reality of what I had done. I had just killed a living thing. My brief moment of shock was a mistake. My shots had drawn attention. From the fog to my left, a new creature emerged. It was bigger than the others, its armor thicker, its blades longer and gleaming with some kind of venom. It turned its eyeless, featureless face directly towards me. It didn't make a sound, but I felt it scream in my mind, a wave of pure predatory hunger. And then it charged, straight. The world narrowed to a single, terrifying point of focus, the monster charging straight at me. It was a nightmare of sharpened bone and blind hunger, closing the distance with impossible speed. My Caelian mind screamed at me with perfect, cold logic. You cannot win. Your armor is inferior. Your weapon skill is negligible. The optimal course of action is to retreat. But there was nowhere to retreat to. The memory of Anya's voice cut through my panic. You think you die. You feel and you react. But how could I react? I couldn't overpower it. I couldn't outrun it. The thought was a dead end. And then a new thought surfaced, a strange hybrid of my old self and the person this planet was forcing me to become. Logic didn't have to be a long, drawn-out analysis. It could be a tool, a scalpel used in a split second. I wouldn't aim for its head or its chest. The armor was too thick, a waste of energy. Logic, I would aim for something smaller, something weaker, a joint. I stood my ground, raised the rifle, and instead of panicking, I let my analytical mind do the one thing it was good at, calculate a single simple trajectory. I didn't see a monster anymore. I saw a geometry problem. It lunged, I fired. Not a wild spray, but a single concentrated burst aimed at its left foreleg, right where the bladed limb met the shoulder joint. The energy bolts hit home with a sound like cracking ceramic. The creature didn't die. It shrieked a silent, psychic scream that lanced through my mind, and its charge faltered as its leg buckled. It stumbled, its momentum gone, crashing to the rock just a few feet from me. It wasn't down for long. It was already pushing itself up, its eyeless face turning towards me again. But it had made a mistake. It had focused on me, and in doing so, had ignored the rest of the pack. Mine, Jack's Rhino Gideon's voice boomed over the comms. A shadow fell over me. The big man stepped in front of him, planting his feet like the roots of a mountain, and leveled his cannon at the wounded creature. What he did next wasn't a tactical shot. It was an execution, an act of pure annihilating overkill. The resulting blast vaporized the creature and sent a shockwave that kicked up dust and rock for meters around. Jax didn't even look at me. He just swiveled his cannon back toward the main fight. "Watch your six, Caelian," he grunted. I scrambled back behind my cover, my heart's hammering. I had survived. I had used logic not to freeze, but to focus. It felt different. Not good, but it felt like progress. My brief moment of self-discovery was cut short by a new sound over the comms. It wasn't the sound of gunfire or Mickey's sarcastic remarks or Anya's calm commands. It was a scream, a raw, ragged scream of pure pain. I looked across the ridge just in time to see it happen. Mickey was on her knees trying to fix one of her damaged turrets. A smaller, faster blight creature had slipped past Rhino's field of fire. It lunged at her from the side. Leo Patch Gallo saw it. He didn't shout a warning. He just moved. He threw himself forward, shoving Mickey hard out of the creature's path. He took the hit that was meant for her. The creature's bladed arms sliced through the armor on his side like it was paper. Leo screamed again as he was thrown to the ground, a dark, crimson stain blossoming across his torso. The battle changed. The dark humor vanished. The cold professionalism shattered. The laughter died. "Patches down!" Anya's voice was no longer a captain's. It was a roar, a sound of pure maternal fury. "Rhino, cover me!" "Glitch, suppressing fire now." Jax bellowed in what sounded like genuine rage, and his cannon, which had been firing in controlled bursts, became a torrent of unending destruction. He wasn't just holding a line anymore. He was trying to erase that part of the battlefield from existence. Mickey, her face a mask of shock and fury, turned on the creature that had wounded Leo. She fired her pulse rifle on full auto, a wild, undisciplined spray of energy born from pure panic and rage, until the thing was nothing but a smoking crater. The team's perfect, chaotic formation was broken. Their greatest strength, the fierce, unspoken loyalty they had for each other, had just become their greatest vulnerability. Anya was already sprinting towards Leo, firing her rifle with one hand as she ran. The first crack in their armor had appeared, and I had a sickening feeling that the Echo Blight knew exactly how to break it wide open. Anya slid the last few feet on her knees, her heavy armor carving grooves in the black rock. She was at Leo's side in an instant. Her rifle dropped in favor of the medkit on her belt. "Talk to me, Patch," she commanded, her voice tight and controlled, but the fury beneath it was a wildfire. She ripped away the shredded armor on his side, exposing a deep, gruesome gash that was weeping dark red blood. It hurts, Captain," Leo gasped, his face pale with shock. I know, kid. I know, she said, her hands already working, spraying a quick sealing foam into the wound. Just stay with me. The whispers in my head changed their tune. They had tasted blood and now they were ravenous. He's bleeding out. So fragile. You can't save him, Mama Bear. You'll watch another one of your cubs die. Anya flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of her jaw. She ignored it, focusing on Leo. But the damage was done. Her focus, once spread across the entire battlefield, was now laser-pointed on the boy bleeding at her feet. And the Blight knew it. The flow of the battle shifted instantly. The smaller creatures, which had been swarming indiscriminately, now surged towards Anya and Leo's exposed position. They weren't trying to kill them, they were trying to pin them down, to separate the head from the body of the pack. They're trying to isolate her. I yelled into the comms, my voice raw. No kidding, Starman. Mickey snapped back. She and Jax were fighting back to back, a desperate island of defiance in a sea of black chitin. Any other brilliant observations? But her sarcastic bravado was thin. I saw her glance over at Leo and her face was a mask of fear and rage. She was firing wildly, her precise aim gone, replaced by pure, undisciplined anger. Her actions were saving Anya, but they were also wasting precious energy and time. Then through the chaos, I saw it. While the swarm was focused on the drama unfolding around Leo, a new type of creature was emerging from a fissure in the rock wall near the resonance beacon. It was different. It was leaner, sleeker, and moved with a horrifying, deliberate slowness. It wasn't a soldier. It was an assassin. And its target was the bomb. Mickey, I screamed, pointing. The beacon! Mickey's head snapped around. Her eyes widened in horror as she saw the new threat. Oh, you have got to be kidding me, she breathed. She didn't hesitate. She broke formation, leaving Jax to handle the swarm alone, and sprinted towards the beacon. Jax, buy me a second, she yelled. Mickey, no! Anya's voice was a desperate plea, but she was trapped, her hands covered in Leo's blood. The assassin creature was fast. It reached the bomb and raised one of its bladed limbs, preparing to smash the delicate device. Mickey threw herself forward in a desperate slide, firing her rifle from the hip. The shots went wide, but it was enough to make the creature pause and turn its attention to her. It hissed, a silent wave of malice in my mind, and lunged. What happened next was a blur of desperate courage. Mickey dropped her rifle and drew the combat knife from her boot. She was a tech specialist, not a knife fighter. It was a suicidal move. But she met the creature's charge head-on. She ducked under its first swing, her knife slashing upwards, finding a gap in its armor. The creature shrieked, a psychic sound of pain and surprise. But it was too big, too strong. Its other arm came around, catching Mickey across the chest and flinging her against the rock wall with sickening force. Her helmet cracked. The light in her visor flickered and died. She slumped to the ground motionless. The assassin creature, wounded but not dead, turned back to the bomb. It raised its blade again. But Mickey Sato wasn't done. With her last ounce of strength, she reached for a small, circular device on her belt, one of her custom-made EMP grenades. Her fingers fumbled, then found the activation switch. She didn't throw it. She just held it up. Catch, she whispered, her voice a faint, broken ghost in my comms. The grenade pulsed once, unleashing a wave of blue energy. The assassin creature convulsed as its primitive nervous system was fried. It collapsed in a heap, its limbs twitching, just inches from the bomb. The beacon was safe. But Mickey didn't move again. The fight seemed to stop. The universe held its breath. Jack stood frozen, staring at her still form. Anya looked up from Leo's side, her face a portrait of utter devastation. They had lost one of their own. The first circuit in their chaotic, beautiful machine had been broken. And I knew with a terrible, hollow certainty that the rest were about to follow. The silence where Mickey's cynical voice used to be was a wound in the air. For a half-second, the universe seemed to hold its breath, a brief, shocked pause in the symphony of violence. Then the Echo Blight, sensing the fracture in our resolve, surged forward with renewed hunger. Jack's Rhino Gideon saw it. He saw Mickey's still form, and something inside the mountain of a man broke. He let out a wordless roar of pure, undiluted agony and rage. His cannon, which had been a tool of tactical suppression, became an instrument of vengeance. He no longer fired at groups. He targeted individual creatures, pouring overwhelming firepower into each one until it was utterly obliterated. His fury a physical force that briefly pushed the tide back. But it was rage, not strategy. He was burning through ammo at an unsustainable rate. "Jax, control your fire!" Anya yelled, her voice cracking. She was still desperately trying to stabilize Leo, whose breathing was becoming shallow. "Jax, listen to me." He didn't listen. He was lost in his grief. The whispers swirled around us, feasting on our despair. "All alone now, big man. Your little spark is gone. She's dead. Dead. Dead." I saw Jax stumble, his cannon lowering for a second. The psychological assault was becoming unbearable. Anya knew they were out of time. She looked from Leo's pale face to Jax's blind rage, then at the beacon, their only hope. "The detonator," she said more to herself than to me. Mickey had the remote sequence on her console, but Mickey's console was shattered, lying next to her body. "The manual trigger, then," I said, my voice urgent. "The EMP," Anya rasped, her face a mask of dawning horror. "Mickey's last grenade. It must have fried the manual trigger mechanism." She was right. The assassin creature was dead, but in saving the bomb from destruction, Mickey had inadvertently disabled it. Their sacrifice, their entire mission, was for nothing. They had the weapon, but no way to fire it. This was it, the final logical conclusion. Mission failure. I looked at the bomb. The EMP blast had blown a panel off its side, exposing the intricate guts within. I could see the primary energy conduits, two thick crystalline rods that were meant to connect and start the chain reaction. The trigger mechanism between them was melted, a blackened, useless lump of slag. A broken circuit, and my mind, my logical Caelian mind, finally saw the one single impossible solution. It saw the raw energy humming within the conduits. It saw the gap between them. And it remembered the most basic fact of my own biology. My people were not made of just flesh and blood. We were beings of light, of energy. Our bodies were designed to channel it, to shape it. We were conductors. I wasn't just bait. Valerius hadn't just sent me as an observer. He had sent me as a fail-safe, a human-shaped key for a lock they couldn't pick. I started moving, my legs carrying me towards the bomb. "Orin, what are you doing?" Anya yelled, her attention snapping to me. "Get back here!" I didn't stop. I reached the humming, damaged sphere and knelt beside it. I looked back at her. Her face was streaked with Leo's blood and her own tears. She was a queen watching her kingdom burn. "The circuit is broken," I said, my voice clear and steady in the comms. "But I cannot complete it." She stared at me, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" "My body," I explained, my voice calm. I finally understood everything. The chaos, the logic, the sacrifice. My Caelian biology. It can channel energy. I can become the wire. I can connect the conduits and trigger the detonation. The realization hit her. Her eyes widened, first with disbelief, then with horrified refusal. "No," she said, shaking her head. "Absolutely not. We don't sacrifice allies. That is not what we do. Look around you, Captain." I shot back, my voice ringing with a strength I never knew I possessed. "Your way has failed. My way has failed. This is all that's left. Mickey's sacrifice means nothing if this bomb doesn't go off. Let her death mean something." Her eyes darted from my face to Leo, who was barely conscious, then to Jax, who was fighting on pure suicidal rage, then to the horde of creatures that was beginning to push through their failing defense. She knew I was right. All the fight went out of her, replaced by a devastating, weary acceptance. "Are you sure about this, Orin?" she asked, her voice breaking. I looked at the sparking, humming conduits of the bomb. I was terrified. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of absolute purpose. I was no longer an observer. I was the final variable in the equation. I gave her a single firm nod. "Make it count." I turned back to the bomb. I took a deep breath of the toxic air. Then I reached out and placed one hand on each of the crystalline rods. The world vanished in a flash of pure, white-hot energy. It surged into me, not as pain, but as information, as power, as the voices and feelings of 1,000 dying stars. My vision went white. The sound of the battle disappeared, replaced by the roar of a sun being born inside my head. The last thing I heard before my own consciousness was overwhelmed was Anya Petrova's voice. No longer a captain, no longer a soldier, but a grieving woman roaring a final desperate command to her last standing son. "Jax, buy him time!" The universe dissolved. There was no pain. Pain was too simple, too logical a concept for what was happening. There was only the feeling of a dam breaking, of an ocean of raw, untamed energy pouring into the empty vessel that was me. I was no longer Orin. I was a wire, a conduit, and the current passing through me was the soul of Task Force 87. The first thing I felt was Jax. His rage was a physical force, a roaring fire of pure defiance. It wasn't just anger. It was the stubborn, unbreakable pride of a mountain refusing to crumble. I felt the memory behind it, a promise made to a smiling face in a worn photograph. A promise to never fall, to never break. It was the roaring, percussive beat of a heart that would not stop fighting, even after it had stopped beating. Then came Leo. His presence wasn't a roar, it was a quiet, fading melody of sorrow. It was the feeling of sunlight on a world he would never see again. It was the profound sadness of a healer who couldn't heal himself. The quiet regret for a life unlived. It was the soft, aching harmony that gave the rage its meaning. And then Anya. Her emotion overwhelmed all the others. It was not the calm of a captain. It was the ferocious, consuming fire of a mother bear watching her cubs fall. It was a love so fierce it had become a weapon. It was grief so profound it had turned into a promise of vengeance. It was the soaring, screaming, heartbreaking melody that tied everything together. I could even feel an echo of Mickey, a spark of her sharp, cynical wit, a final, defiant bit of static refusing to be silenced. Rage, sorrow, love, defiance. It was a symphony of human emotion, a chaotic, beautiful, terrible storm, and it was all raging inside me. My Caelian mind, which treasured silence and order, was being torn apart and rebuilt into something new. I was no longer just a conductor. I was the instrument itself. The pressure was building, a sun threatening to go nova inside my chest. I couldn't contain it. I didn't even try. I opened my mouth, a mouth that was no longer physical, and I let it all out. From my body, connected to the beacon, erupted a wave of pure, silent light. It wasn't a flash. It was an expanding dome of impossible white that surged outwards from the ridge, washing over the entire basin in an instant. There was no sound, but the psychic noise was deafening. A single unified scream made of every human feeling I had just experienced. It was the ultimate illogical statement: we are here. We feel, we will not be silenced. The effect on the echo blight was instantaneous and absolute. They stopped. Every creature, from the smallest skittering thing to the largest brute, froze in place as if turned to stone. Their psychic network, their greatest weapon, had just been hit by a concept it had no framework to understand. It was a perfect calculating machine being fed an impossible paradox. They began to twitch, their limbs convulsing. The faint, mocking whispers in my head turned into a chorus of pure, agonized shrieking. Then one by one, they began to fall. They didn't just die, they crumbled, their bodies dissolving into black dust as the hive mind that gave them form was erased from existence. Down in the basin, the great central brain pulsed erratically one last time, then imploded, collapsing into a heap of gray ash. The dome of light faded. The psychic screaming stopped. And for the first time since we had landed, Charon was truly completely silent. The energy receded from my body, leaving a hollow, echoing emptiness behind. The connection to the beacon severed. I felt myself being thrown backwards, away from the sphere, my body tumbling through the air like a discarded doll. I hit the rock hard. My vision, which had been filled with white light, returned to the sickly yellow-green of the fog. I saw the still forms of my teammates. I saw the silent, smoking battlefield. The faint, Caelian light patterns that had always glowed beneath my skin flickered erratically, like a dying star. Then they went dark, and the world... Consciousness returned not like a light switching on, but like a slow tide rising over a barren shore. First came sound, a soft, steady, rhythmic beeping. It was a logical, predictable sound, a sound from my old world. Then came smell, antiseptic, sterile. the clean, lifeless scent of a medical bay. I opened my eyes. The ceiling was white, perfectly, flawlessly white. I was lying on something soft, covered by a thin, warm sheet. I was clean. The thought felt wrong, like a betrayal. I lifted my hand. It was my own, but it felt like a stranger's. I tried to summon the faint, familiar Caelian light that had always glowed beneath my skin, the gentle patterns that were my species' silent language. Nothing happened. I tried again. I tried it again, focusing on my will. A weak, pathetic flicker, like a dying ember, sparked for a moment and then vanished. The energy that had surged through me, the symphony of human souls I had conducted, had burned out my own inner light. The emptiness it left behind was vast and cold. The door to the room hissed open and a medical droid glided in. Its voice was calm, synthesized, and completely devoid of emotion. Specialist Orin, it is good to see you have regained consciousness. My designation is Medical Unit 734. Where? My own voice was a dry rasp. You are aboard the Alliance cruiser Stellaron, en route to Sector Command, the droid replied. You have been in restorative stasis for 3 standard cycles. It paused, its optical sensors glowing a soft blue. I am authorized to deliver your post-mission briefing. The operation on LV-419 designated Charon was a success. The Echo Blight network in the entire sector has been neutralized. The resonance event exceeded all projections. The resonance event. They had given it such a clean, scientific name. A name for the beautiful, terrible thing that had happened. The team, I whispered. Task Force 87? The droid's head tilted slightly. Processing, it stated. It did not need to process. It was a deliberate, programmed pause. A sanitized moment of silence for the dead. Task Force 87 status update, the droid said. His voice unchanging. Corporal Mickey Sato, glitch. Confirmed killed in action. I saw her face, the cynical grin, the little monster she made from wires. Private Leo Gallo, patch. Confirmed killed in action. Succumbed to wounds post-engagement. I saw him clutching his med kit, his wide, honest eyes. Sergeant Jax Gideon, Rhino. Confirmed killed in action. Expired after neutralizing multi remaining hostiles at the perimeter. I saw him standing over me, a mountain of loyalty, after saving my life. Captain Anya Petrova, Mama Bear. Confirmed killed in action. Life support failed due to combat damage. Her last known action was shielding the body of Private Gallo. I saw her fierce, protective eyes, and I heard her last command roaring in my memory. The droid finished. You are the sole survivor, Specialist Orin. I lay there staring at the white ceiling. The names echoed in the silent room. The droid's words were just data. Facts, but in my head, I could still feel them. I could feel the ghost of Jax's stubborn pride, the faint spark of Mickey's defiance, the echo of Leo's quiet hope, the burning fire of Anya's love for her pack. They weren't just a memory. They were a part of me now. I hadn't just conducted their final song. I had absorbed it. I was the echo that remained. The door hissed open again. This time it was not a droid. It was a Caelian like me, but his uniform was crisp and his face was a mask of bureaucratic indifference. He worked for the administrator's office. He looked at me, his gaze lingering for a moment on my now darkened skin where my light should have been. He showed no sympathy. Specialist Orin, he said, his voice as sterile as the room. I'm glad to see you are recovering. Administrator Valerius will require your full debriefing as soon as you are cleared. He didn't call it a report or an interview. He called it a debriefing, the same word they use for extracting data from a machine. And I knew my fight wasn't over. The battle for Charon was finished, but the battle for its truth was just about to begin. The walk to the debriefing room was silent. The Caelian official who escorted me said nothing, his disapproval a cold aura around him. I knew what he saw, a damaged specimen. A Caelian who had lost his light, tainted by the chaotic energy of humans. He was right. I walked into the white room and the memory became the present. Administrator Valerius was sitting there exactly as I remembered him, the glass of water on the table between us. The loop was closing. Specialist Orin, he began without preamble. Your preliminary report is, as I stated, insufficient. It is filled with emotional conjecture. We are here for facts. Let us begin with the failure of the primary detonator on the resonance beacon. I looked at him, and for the first time, I felt no intimidation. The ghosts inside me, the echoes of the stray dogs, were a shield. It wasn't a failure, I said, my voice even. It was a consequence of Corporal Sato's final action. An action that saved the device from destruction. A sentimental analysis, Valerius dismissed. The fact remains, the device was inert. The mission was a failure. And yet, the echo blight was neutralized. The missing variable is you, Orin. Explain logically how you, a non-combat observer, triggered a device that our best engineers could not. This was his moment. The reason for this entire debriefing. He didn't care about their sacrifice. He cared about the anomaly. He wanted to dissect the miracle, put it in a box, and replicate it. You wouldn't understand, I said. Try me, he insisted, a flicker of irritation in his voice. I am the foremost strategic analyst in this sector. I understand everything. You understand data, I countered, leaning forward slightly. You understand probabilities. You don't understand what it feels like to watch your family die. You don't understand choosing to stand with them anyway. The beacon didn't run on technology, Administrator. It ran on love and rage. It ran on a promise to a photograph. It ran on a final, defiant laugh in the face of oblivion. Put that in your report. Valerius stared at me, his face unreadable. He clearly saw that he would not get the clean, quantifiable data he wanted. He sighed, a sound of a machine resetting. I had hoped your Caelian logic would provide a clearer picture, he said, his tone shifting. But perhaps you are more damaged than our medics realized. It seems I must provide the logic for you. He steepled his fingers. We have, of course, studied your species biology, Specialist. The ability to interact with and channel ambient energy is unique. A fascinating evolutionary trait. A cold dread began to pool in my stomach. When the mission to Karen was being planned, Valerius continued, his voice flat and academic, we calculated multiple points of failure. The human element is notoriously unpredictable. The primary and manual triggers on the beacon were robust, but not infallible. A contingency was required. He looked directly at me, and his eyes were completely empty of empathy. Your assignment was that contingency, Orin. You were not just an observer. You were a biological failsafe, a living key for a lock we couldn't risk leaving shut. We knew that if all else failed, a Caelian, under sufficient emotional distress, could potentially complete the circuit. The white room seemed to tilt. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place, and the picture it formed was grotesque. My choice on that ridge, my moment of profound, terrifying purpose, it wasn't a choice at all. It was just another calculated step in their bloody equation. They hadn't just used the humans as a bomb. They had used me as its trigger. I had thought I was a ghost. I was just another gear in the machine. I looked at Valerius. I felt no rage, no sorrow. The fire and the grief of the stray dogs had burned all of that away, leaving something hard and clear in its place. I stood up. Thank you, Administrator, I said, my voice perfectly calm. You have made everything perfectly logical. I turned and walked toward the door, leaving him sitting there in his clean, white, silent room. He had his facts. He had his data. But I had the truth. Back in my assigned quarters, I stood in front of the mirror. I saw a stranger, a Caelian with empty eyes and skin that no longer glowed. But I wasn't empty. I was full of echoes. Full of their voices, their courage, their final defiant stand. They had been turned into a statistic, a successful resonance event. Valerius would file his report, and their story would be buried in a classified archive, a footnote in a war nobody understood. The ghost inside me would not allow it. I walked over to the public data terminal in my room. My status as the sole survivor of Karen came with certain high-level security clearances. A reward for my valor. The irony was sickening. I used that clearance to open a secure channel, not to Alliance Command, but to the wider galactic network. My fingers flew across the console. I wasn't a soldier. I wasn't a hero, but I was still a damn good data specialist. I compiled a single data packet. It contained everything. The full, unedited audio from the team's comms, the jokes, the fear, Anya's final roar. The helmet cam footage from my own perspective, the blur of the battle, Mickey's final desperate act. the terrible beauty of the final psychic scream. And the centerpiece, the complete, high-fidelity recording of my debriefing with Administrator Valerius, his cold voice explaining the price of victory in perfect, logical detail. I attached a single line of text to the file. No commentary, no explanation. The truth needed no help. This is what victory costs. This is how the stray dogs laughed. Specialist Orin, sole survivor, Task Force 87. With a final steady press of a button, I sent the packet out into the void, aimed at every independent news outlet, every conspiracy theorist blog, every disgruntled colony from here to the outer rim. I leaned back in my chair. I was now a traitor to the Alliance, a fugitive. My life as I knew it was over. I felt no fear. I felt the quiet, unshakable pride of Jax Gideon. I felt the sharp, defiant spark of Mickey Sato. I felt the fierce, protective loyalty of Anya Petrova. I walked to the viewport and looked out at the endless sea of stars. For the first time in a long time, I looked at my hand. And there, beneath the skin, a single, tiny point of light flickered to life. It wasn't the soft, orderly glow of a Caelian. It was a bright, fierce, chaotic spark. A human spark. My mission was no longer to observe. It was to testify. And I would make sure the entire galaxy heard their song.